the House Ways and Means Committee making last-minute changes to the GOP tax bill before sending it to the full House, and Senate Republicans preparing to unveil their own tax legislation. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. House Speaker Paul Ryan saying both chambers will work out the differences between their two plans. But with President Trump's first major legislative victory hanging in the balance, a battle within the GOP still looms. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill. Mike, what's the latest on the House side with that tax reform bill?
Well, Dana, Ways and Means Chairman Kevin Brady just offered a 29-page amendment, and we're still going through it, but it includes things like preserving the adoption tax credit. Ways and Means members have been going through tax reform all day, offering amendments, arguing about the bill. They're expected to vote on this updated amendment sometime this afternoon, with the idea being it would go to the House floor sometime next week. House Speaker Paul Ryan is defending this tax reform push.
This is not unpopular. We're actually letting people keep more of their own money. We're cleaning out the loopholes of the tax code and having a fairer tax system. So we're going to have faster economic growth, bigger paychecks, fairer taxes. That's not an unpopular thing to do.
Some sparks flew when Brady said that Democrats would have 20 minutes to review the updated amendment. Democrats on the panel were not pleased. Dana?
Yeah, they were probably not speed readers, but 20 minutes is better than none. What is the latest on the Senate tax reform rollout? We expect that today?
Yeah, no question about it. We do expect to see that Senate plan later this afternoon. It is expected to be different than the House plan. And already you see Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer going after one provision. In the Senate, it is expected to remove that state and local tax deduction. So you see Schumer trying to drive a wedge between House and Senate Republicans.
Senate Republicans are telling House Republicans there'll be no compromise on state and local deductibility. It's full repeal or bust, because Senate Republicans need the revenue raised by ending this popular middle-class deduction.
House leaders are planning to move forward with their version of tax reform on the floor next week. The Senate will also go through its process once it's rolled out later this afternoon. Dana?
All right, Mike Emanuel, thank you for bringing us the update.
Sure.
And joining us now is Chris Starwalt, Fox News politics editor and editor of the Halftime Report, and my co-host of I'll Tell You What, the podcast everyone's talking about. Let's talk about the tax reform bill. So Lindsey Graham earlier today got some eyebrows raised when he said, if we don't pass this, the donations will stop. But Kellyanne Conway was just on with Harris Faulkner, making a pretty good case, I think, for the president's reasoning for wanting to get this done. What do you think?
Well, look, the Republican Congress is in a terrible position. They're in a very tight spot. The president wants a win, and they've made it very clear. The White House has made it clear they want to win. The economy is his best issue. They want to reinforce their strongest suit and pass a tax cut that the president believes will spur economic growth. However, the legislation so far broadly unpopular. The American electorate right now is looking at a strong economy and concerned about losing key deductions, or concerned about the people who are going to have to pay more taxes, because this is a sort of a non-traditional Republican tax plan in that it actually raises taxes for some people. Then you have the donor class, which has funded the Republican Party for these decades, always on the basis of being able to get a tax cut. They would love not just a tax cut overall, but a reduction in the corporate tax rate. So they're getting squeezed from all sides. Their donors, their president, and their constituents, and everybody wants something a little different.
Let me ask you about that idea that it's broadly unpopular. So one of the things I read this morning is that after Tuesday's election, people were looking back and saying, when President Obama lost so badly in those elections in 2009, he pushed forward and continued on something that was very much unpopular, and that was Obamacare, and that has haunted the Democratic Party ever since. Do you think that tax reform is actually as unpopular as Obamacare? Or I actually think that there's probably more support overall for that.
Well, look, the challenge here is, how do you please a party? The conservative base wants just lower taxes, right? They want just that. And so they say, cut taxes and you'll fire us up and we'll go out to vote. But then there's this other danger. So the Republicans have to choose. Do they plunge into the breach? Do they act on something that is risky in the hopes that they can sort of turn around the climate for them? Because as the Virginia election showed, it is a good climate for Democrats right now, probably about as good as it was for Republicans going into 2010. So the Republicans have been on the other side of this, and they say, so what do? Do we act in a way that might change the dynamic, or do we start to batten down the hatches and hope to ride out a difficult time and not make people any angrier than they are?
So the way that they've done it is that the process is they only need 51 votes in the Senate. They're able to probably be able to get this out of the House, I would imagine. And I wonder if that's part of their theory. Let me take a look at this. The American Action Network executive director said today that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act promises real relief with a $1,200 tax cut for middle-class families. The simpler, fairer, more competitive tax code laid out in the bill will raise wages, increase take-home pay, and give working families greater peace of mind. So if they have, I guess, 40 groups, I guess, today signed on to this letter, conservative groups, can they do this just with Republicans?
Well, they can do it just with Republicans, but as we're seeing today, what they do in the House is now, I won't say unimportant, but for the time being, the focus shifts to the Senate. And in the Senate, I have a hard time believing right now that they're going to find something that is going to please equally Ted Cruz and Susan Collins at the different ends of the spectrum. I have a hard time believing that they're going to find legislation that does that and stays within reasonable windows on debt and deficit. So they're getting ready to drop their legislation. That is going to trump whatever the House does. The House is engaged in all this discussion about these small issues. The Senate's getting ready to change the whole debate.
So then take me back to, you're the politics editor, so take us back out, look 30,000 feet looking down. Do you think Republicans must pass tax reform if they're to hold on to the majorities when they come to the midterms next year?
Look, the places, the people, if we're just working on what we know and the House plan, the places that would be the most hurt by the House plan, the constituents that would be the most hurt by the House plan, happen to have a pretty considerable overlap with the districts where Republicans are already doing poorly because of the unpopularity of the president. This is in more affluent suburbs. This is with those upper middle class households. So maybe what you do is you just torch those votes anyway, and you make an all-in play for economic populism, sort of the Bannonism, and you go the other direction and you say, yeah, we are soaking the rich and we mean to do it. Maybe that's the way out. I don't know, but right now they got to do something other than straddle this issue and end up getting squished.
Let me ask you this last question then. So Congress's year-end priorities are many, and there's not much time left. Take a look at this. We've got the government funding that expires December 8th. They have National Flood Insurance Program. That's December 31st. A third disaster aid bill expected this month. Veterans Choice Program, FISA powers. That's already big. There's already a big fight about that. So they don't have many working days in order to get all of this done. How do you think they'll do?
Well, you know what they do. They wait until the end, and when it's too late to legislate well, they
stuff it all in there.
Right. It's like Sam's Club. They say, well, I don't know whether or not you like this kind of chili cheese chips, but there's a lot of them, and they're going to jam all of that stuff into giant bundles at the end. They're going to buy in bulk at the end, and they're going to shove it through right at the very end. And on the other side, people say, Merry Christmas.
That's right. It's like that big keg of buttermilk ranch that we were talking about on the podcast yesterday.
Exactly.
Tune in if you want to hear about that. Chris Starwell, thank you so much.
You bet.
Investigators looking into the deadly Texas church shooting now face a familiar problem, unlocking the gunman's cell phone. This as we learn more about the future of that church. Casey Stiegel is live in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Casey, we're also hearing more from the pastor. What did he say?
Yeah, Dana, in fact, we're just getting information not terribly long ago from him that the site where Sunday's deadly shooting happened at the First Baptist Church back there behind me will in fact be demolished. He says that there's already talk of a memorial going up in its place to honor those who lost their lives as they simply came here to worship. Pastor Frank Pomeroy told the Southern Baptist Convention that conducting future services in the space would be just too painful. 26 members of his congregation were killed, ranging in age from an unborn baby to a 77-year-old man. As we know by now, Pastor Pomeroy and his wife happened to be out of town when Sunday's violence broke out. Their 14-year-old daughter, Annabelle, was not with them. She was here and among those who did not make it out alive. But through all of the sadness and all of the grieving, Pastor Pomeroy telling Fox News that he forgives the suspect.
Do you forgive the shooter?
Yes, and to be quite honest, I am more angry with the systems around than I am the shooter.
We know now that the gunman's cell phone has been collected as evidence, and Apple has said that it has offered technical support to the feds. However, the FBI telling Fox News that Apple has that they have not reached out to Apple for their help so far, Dana.
Yeah, hoping to get the clarity on that. But could you also tell us, Casey, before you go, what about the powerful prayer service that was held last night?
Boy, oh boy, not many dry eyes in the House, as you can imagine. Hundreds from this small community gathered to say goodbye and to honor those who lost their lives. Vice President Mike Pence and Attorney General Jeff Sessions were among those in attendance. VP Pence told the crowd he would be working closely with Congress to try and determine how the shooter's misconduct within the U.S. Air Force was not enough to raise red flags that would have prohibited him from buying any more guns. Meantime, this Sunday, the First Baptist Church will be holding services scheduled to take place at a community center across town as this close-knit community, still in shock, continues to grieve. Dana.
Casey Stegall, thank you so much. So that massacre inside a Texas church sparking action in Congress, Democrats proposing a new assault weapons ban. Delaware Senator Chris Coons joins me live to explain what else is in the bill. Plus, President Trump in Asia launching an all-out charm offensive in China.
I don't blame China. After all, who can blame a country for being able to take advantage?
Another battle over gun control about to hit Capitol Hill. Senate Democrats introducing a new bill banning assault weapons, as well as high-capacity magazines and so-called bump stocks. Joining me now, Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat from Delaware. Sir, thank you for being with us today. What do you think would be different this time around in trying to get this bill passed?
Well, Dana, I have co-sponsored a bill that would outlaw bump stocks, trigger cranks, the things that were used by the shooter in the tragedy in Las Vegas to take semi-automatic weapons and make them automatic weapons. And that's a small but real step that has been considered or discussed by folks from all different backgrounds in the debate about guns and the Second Amendment. I'm very encouraged, Dana, that Republican chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley of Iowa, has joined with Dianne Feinstein to call a hearing for next week. It'll be Tuesday, where we're going to look at bump stocks and background checks. I think we need to focus on things that we can credibly get done that will deal with some of the flaws and holes in our current background check system, that'll advance some responsible fixes to things like bump stocks being widely available, and that'll invest in mental health care. We've got laws on the books that aren't being fully enforced, as we saw with the shooter in Texas, and we've got situations where I think we should be able to legislate to address some of the challenges facing our country in regards to mental health and widespread access to guns by those who shouldn't have access to guns.
What do you think that could be done from a messaging standpoint, from a Democrat's perspective, to try to advance legislation that you want, but to not alienate so many people who feel like it's just a slippery slope to taking away their Second Amendment rights?
Well, I think it's important for those of us who are Democrats and in the Senate, who've gone hunting, who are gun owners, who have grown up in a community, a culture, or a family of gun ownership, to speak clearly and forcefully to the point that we don't want to violate the Second Amendment. We don't want to take people's guns away. We just want to make sure that folks who legally shouldn't have access to guns, convicted felons, those who've committed acts of domestic violence, those who are adjudicated to be mentally ill, that they don't have access to guns. And I do think there is a middle path where we reassert to people who are concerned about our intentions that it's not our goal to take people's guns away.
Do you think you would have any Republican co-sponsors then, or be able to pass it this time around?
Well, we'll see. I think a reasonable centrist proposal around background checks that fixes some of the loopholes that caused or helped facilitate, the tragic killing in Texas is exactly the sort of thing we ought to be able to address. Look, the killer there was convicted of domestic violence, such a severe incident of violence against his own family that he spent a year in the brig and was dishonorably discharged. The failure to transfer that to Texas, to law enforcement there, made it easier for him to get access to a weapon.
Yes, and in fact, we just heard from Casey Stegall and the pastor of that church in Texas, and he said that he forgives the shooter, but he has real issues with basically this guy falling through the cracks and being able to perpetrate this crime. Can I switch gears with you just for a second? Because
Sure.
The other day you were on the phone with President Trump when he called in to talk to several Democrats on the Senate side about tax reform. And I know that in just any moment now, Senate Republicans will release their version of the bill. Do you think that you could be a yes on tax reform?
Well, there were 12 Democratic senators who were in a meeting with Gary Cohn, who's Trump's most senior economic advisor, when the president called in from his trip to Asia. I appreciate that he took the time out to reach out to us. I think what he heard from all 12 of us was it is awfully late in this process to ask us for our ideas, given that the tax bill is going to be released later today, and they're talking about marking it up on Monday. But in some ways, better late than never. My point to the president was this. He campaigned on a middle-class tax cut, on strengthening manufacturing and infrastructure. And those are three priorities that we share. And I think if he accepts the tax plan that's being moved by Republicans here in the House and the Senate, it's not going to meet those goals. It's going to raise taxes over 10 years on many of the middle class, and most of the benefits will be seen by the wealthiest Americans. That's not what he campaigned on. If the Republicans are unsuccessful in their current efforts, I hope he will open the door to working with us and finding a bipartisan path to doing what he actually campaigned on.
Yeah, Kellyanne Conway was on with Harris Faulkner just a few moments ago and saying that it's not up to Republicans to be bipartisan, but the Democrats, there's an open door, and if you guys want to come through it, they'll accept it. Ron Wyden is on the floor of the Senate talking about it right now. You're from a low-tax state. I imagine that just philosophically you can see the benefit of lower taxes. So do you think that there's anything that you would suggest or try to amend to get yourself to a yes?
Yes, I have 3 bipartisan tax proposals. I actually talked to Kellyanne Conway about them when we were at a dinner together a number of weeks ago. My co-sponsors are conservative Republican senators, and these are designed to strengthen manufacturing in the United States, to help make domestic energy more broadly competitive. I've been honored to work with Senator Jerry Moran on the Competitiveness Caucus that we co-founded, and a number of my proposals come out of that experience. Senator Roberts of Kansas and I have a bill that would encourage companies to manufacture here what they make here by giving them a bigger R&D credit. If they make things here, they invent here. I've suggested those ideas to Gary Cohn, to Kellyanne Conway, to Secretary Ross, and I'm hopeful we'll have a chance to work together on them.
Maybe we'll find out later today if any of those make it into the Senate bill. Senator Chris Coons, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.
The Republican Senate candidate from Alabama, Judge Roy Moore, accused of sexual misconduct in a new report in the Washington Post newspaper. The judge is now responding, and now several Republican senators are weighing in too. The details are next. Republican Senate candidate in Alabama, Judge Roy Moore, is responding to a report in the Washington Post in which a woman claims Moore, quote, initiated a sexual encounter in 1979 when she was 14 and the judge was 32 years old. Judge Moore says the report is false and calls it a desperate political attack. Peter Ducey is following the story from Washington. Peter.
Dana, just in, the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says that he sees these allegations as so serious. He says that if it turns out Moore was inappropriate sexually with a then 14-year-old named Lee Korfman, then he needs to step aside right now. And of course, this is before the election. Alabama's other senator, a Republican, Richard Shelby, just said in a hallway that he does not think there's any place for Judge Moore in the Senate if the story is true. But the candidate himself is calling this false and fake news. In an emailed statement, Moore's campaign says in part, quote, national liberal organizations know their chosen candidate, Doug Jones, is in a death spiral, and this is their last-ditch Hail Mary. The Washington Post has already endorsed the judge's opponent, and for months they have engaged in a systematic campaign to distort the truth about the judge's record and career and derail his campaign. The Washington Post says this accuser, Korfman, did not come to them looking for publicity, and that instead they found her after hearing rumors during other reporting about inappropriate behavior by Moore several decades ago. They also say they found 3 other women who accuse a 30-something Roy Moore of pursuing them when they were between 16 and 18 years old. If Moore ends up quitting right now, his name would probably stay on the ballot of the early December special election to fill Jeff Sessions' seat. However, there could be lawsuits to get new ballots printed. We also just heard from Senator Luther Strange, who Moore defeated in a very hot GOP primary last month, and Luther Strange is calling this very disturbing. Dana.
I imagine he is. All right. Well, Peter Ducey, that news just broke, and thanks for bringing us the latest. President Trump wrapping up a trip with one of America's biggest allies on North Korea. What he's saying as he continues his tour through Asia. Plus, why is China amping up its military, and should our military be worried? A charm offensive in China, hoping to win Beijing's cooperation on North Korea.
The United States is committed to the complete and permanent denuclearization of North Korea. So important. China can fix this problem easily and quickly. And I am calling on China and your great president to hopefully work on it very hard.
Kevin Corke is live in Beijing, where I know it's in the middle of the night. What else is the president saying about North Korea, Kevin?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, around 3:30 in the morning. I'm losing track. I've been traveling all over the globe. Listen, this has been a visit, Dana, that's been awash in pageantry and nuance, but there was certainly no mistaking the president's message to China as it relates to North Korea. Either you rein in the North, or we will. That stern warning, an obvious and stark contrast to all the beauty that we have seen here in the pageantry, this beautifully choreographed evening at the state dinner. Just one example of the latest pictures that we have, all part of 2 days of exchanges that saw the two powers agree that Pyongyang's ambitions are a threat to the region and that North Korea shouldn't become a nuclear power.
We agreed not to replicate failed approaches of the past, and there were many. We agreed on the need to fully implement all UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea and to increase economic pressure until North Korea abandons its reckless and dangerous path.
Bottom line, what North Korea and China obviously are dealing with is a major provocation here in the region. Here's what Beijing wants, Dana. They want the U.S. to let sanctions take their course. They want the U.S. to remain open to negotiations. That is something the Trump administration has remained open to, but with all options on the table. Dana?
Well, there's another part of the trip. Any of these trips, you are going to have the president trying to be America's best salesman. So tell me about the big trade deals that were announced today between the U.S. and China.
I love talking to you about this stuff because I know you get it. You've done this before. You know exactly how it goes, and you always want to have deliverables, Dana. In this case, we're talking about $250 billion in trade deals between the U.S. and China announced today. We're talking aircraft, auto, even food products. Very important. But this is what's interesting today. We saw the president raise some eyebrows, to be frank, in that he didn't necessarily blame China for the massive trade gap between our two countries. He simply said they're doing what they should do for their people, and he added he was going to do the same thing for us.
Both the United States and China will have a more prosperous future if we can achieve a level economic playing field. Right now, unfortunately, it is a very one-sided and unfair one, but I don't blame China. But in actuality, I do blame past administrations.
Wow, that really did raise some eyebrows, but he was clear. He felt like we should have and could have done a better job in the past. We'll see if the Trump administration is able to do better. As you well know, after this, it's on to Vietnam. More trade talk, quite frankly, including TPP, the U.S. administration pulling out of that. That plus... we're going to talk about security cooperation in the region. South China Sea probably will get some conversation, and maybe a meeting that you've heard about, Dana, a possible tete-a-tete with Russian President Vladimir Putin. We'll keep you posted on that, but for now, back to you.
Kevin, I just have to remind you, I think it was in 2005, the first trade deal I ever worked on as a deputy press secretary was the Mango Free Trade Agreement with India, and it was huge. Huge press.
It was huge. That's right.
All right. Thanks,
I remember.
Kevin. For more on the president's trip, Dennis Wilder is a professor of Asian Studies at Georgetown University. Dennis, I don't think you were with me in India at the time. You were probably in Asia, in China, doing something that you've always done, which is becoming even more of an expert in the region. The president's trip so far, I think it looks, from my perspective, like really successful. But do you think the media overemphasizes like concrete deliverables on trips like this?
I really do. I think that the president is doing an excellent job in Asia. I think he's building the relationship with the Chinese. That is really important. I don't think the American media understands how important it is in the Chinese context. The Chinese believe in guangxi, which is a term that means relationship. And once you build the relationship, then you can get to the hard issues. Then you can talk frankly. But unless you've really done the work to become friends, to become close with those who you are dealing with, it won't work. You can talk all you want, and it's not going to happen. The president in Mar-a-Lago did an excellent job of wooing Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping returned the favor in Beijing. This was the Mutual Admiration Summit, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing.
And also had that chocolate cake, as I remember well. Take a listen to Secretary Tillerson talking about the effectiveness of the sanctions on North Korea.
There are clear signs, and the Chinese side has shared with us some of the signs they're seeing. We see certain signs of our own through intel and other sources we have that it is creating some stress within North Korea's economy and with some of their citizens, potentially even within some of their military.
Dennis, what do you think about that? And also, I'm curious your thoughts on this idea of that we're open to some sort of negotiation, that maybe North Korea comes to the table for talks. Like, what is there to talk about if everybody is agreed that there would be no nuclear weapons in North Korea?
Well, as you know, Dana, I've been involved in this game on North Korea for a long time. And I will tell you that we are finally at the point where we've gotten the Chinese to put real pain to the North Koreans. These new UN sanctions that are now biting on North Korea, as Secretary Tillerson said, can turn this situation around. It can force the North Korean leader to choose between survival and his nuclear weapons. And I'm betting he will choose survival. And if we can keep the Chinese with us, if we can keep this pressure on, then we can go back to the negotiating table, because what we want is a North Korean leader ready to talk. We don't want to go back to talks for talk's sake. And the only way to get him back ready to really talk is if we have put the kind of pressure on that changes his calculus, that changes his decision. And that kind of pressure can only be done with the help of China, Russia, the other countries in Asia, and indeed countries around the world. And that's exactly what Secretary Tillerson has been doing quietly. It's been highly successful. Many countries have pulled back from North Korea.
That's really interesting. What about the trade aspect? President Trump on the campaign trail blasted China all the time. But today, of course, he's on their home turf. And I think he said something that just makes a lot of sense, that every country does what is best for their own citizens. Do you think the Chinese are trying to figure out some sort of a way to help the president back home here, too?
I think that his remark was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I mean, I think he knows that the Chinese have not been fair, and he talks about the Chinese not being fair. The Chinese know what the president wants. I think he was smart this time not to go trying to get key deliverables. These are structural problems in the relationship. They weren't created overnight. They won't be solved overnight. But I'll just give you an example. I was in Beijing Monday and Tuesday of this week. I tried to use my MasterCard in a restaurant. They won't take it. Now, supposedly, we had a deal with the Chinese that they were going to start letting American credit cards be used in China. That hasn't happened. I think what the president will do quietly and privately with President Xi is say, look, you're not living up to these agreements. I think the key here, and people need to understand this, and Tillerson talked a little about this, is that what the president is doing is publicly, he's building the relationship. Privately, he's pressuring and being candid.
All right. Well, we work for somebody who did the same. All right. Dennis
Exactly
Wilder,
right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana.
China's growing military power, putting President Trump to the test.
We dominate the sky. We dominate the sea. We dominate the land and space.
But with Beijing sparing no expense, how long will that be true? how the economic superpower is now challenging U.S. military supremacy and what it means for our national security. Plus, the showdown between Saudi Arabia and Iran is escalating amid fears of a humanitarian crisis.
I'm Shepard Smith on the Fox News deck. We'll break news in the next hour on the assault on Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. That attack left the senator with broken ribs and fluid on his lungs. The charge against his neighbor, 4th-degree misdemeanor assault. But breaking now on Fox News, sources say this is about to be a much more serious legal matter. We'll have all the details in this mystery attack coming up, and continuing coverage of the new accusations against Alabama's Roy Moore, who's currently in a campaign to be a U.S. senator. The Washington Post newspaper has reported in the last hour that 4 women now claim he pursued them when they were teenagers. One says Judge Moore touched her sexually. Moore says it didn't happen. Details rippling through Washington now. More to come at the top of the hour on Shepard Smith Reporting. We'll see you then.
America's status as a military superpower without equal now facing a serious challenge from China. As President Trump meets with President Xi of China, the numbers are startling too. Take a look. Since 2005, China's military budget has increased by nearly 400%. Within 3 years, China's Navy will add at least 69 submarines to its fleet. Its Air Force already has more than 2,700 planes, and Beijing has at least 1,200 short-range ballistic missiles. Let's talk about this with former Green Beret Commander Michael Waltz, who is also policy advisor in the Bush White House and the Pentagon and a Fox News contributor. All right, Michael.
Hey, Dana.
How big a concern is this? When you look at those numbers and you compare it to our debates here in America are about increases to our military budget, how does it compare?
Well, I think Americans need to wake up to the fact that we have become accustomed since World War II of dominating space, dominating the oceans, and dominating the air. As a soldier, I just take for granted that the United States Air Force goes unchallenged when it's over my head in combat. The Chinese, as you mentioned, so it's not only the numbers of their budget and the size of their budget, but qualitatively, they just unveiled their new stealth fighter. It looks a heck of a lot like our stealth fighter. They control now 90% of the world's rare earth minerals that power everything from iPhones to fighters. And then, they're launching into space at a rate that exceeds both us and Russia. They're building their own space stations, satellites. I mean, investments in artificial intelligence, you name it. At the same time, I just really want to make this point. At the same time, they are the #1 holders of our debt. So we can't spend our way to parity with the Chinese. We have to do it qualitatively, and we have to be smarter about how we about how we spend our own defense dollars.
And what are we doing about it?
Well, I think we need to crack down, and this should be the top of the president's list, crack down on these cyber attacks. As he's mentioned, the largest theft of IP in world history. The Chinese are essentially stealing their way to a technological advantage. And if you listen to President Xi in his re-election speech, he essentially declared that the Chinese are now challenging us as a world superpower. I don't want to share the stage with the Chinese. They don't share our values.
Can I just get your take on one other topic, and that is what's happening in the Middle East. Kuwait is calling on its citizens to leave Lebanon. There's growing tensions between Beirut and Saudi Arabia.
Right.
What does this mean in terms of the Middle East, and how would it affect the United States potentially?
So you have two things going on here, particularly when it comes to the Saudis. You have a long simmering Cold War with Iran that is now heating up. The Saudis felt really kind of abandoned by the Obama administration ever since President Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia. He's given the green light, and their new leadership, Mohammed bin Salman, is taking Iranian aggression on much more forcefully, everything from Syria to Yemen and to Lebanon now. Secondly, though, the new leadership in Saudi Arabia is also looking to seriously modernize and to take on this Wahhabi Islamic extremism that has dominated Saudi politics for so many years. But to do that, he's having to take a very strong hand and a very strong push. And that's why you've just seen so much of the Saudi old guard, frankly, be arrested under corruption charges. From the United States perspective, we've asked the Saudis to take this on for a long time.
Yeah.
But I think the price there is we're going to have to back away from a democracy agenda. He's going to have to do it with an iron fist.
What does it mean then, though, for our efforts in terms of combating the global war on terror, where a lot of this emanates?
Well, I don't know how it's all going to turn out, but, because this is an incredibly bold move on behalf of Mohammed bin Salman. But if it works out, I think this is a move in the right direction for the Saudis, partnered with our allies in the UAE. They're opening up economically. They're opening up socially. Women are allowed to drive now and attend sports and other events with men. I mean, this is the way forward towards a moderate Islam. And as President Trump said in his speech in Saudi, the solution to Islamic extremism has to come from within, and I think this is a move in the right direction, provided it doesn't blow back on them. And then a quick last question on Yemen and the humanitarian crisis. Should we be doing anything there on that? Well, I think we need to stay engaged with the Saudis. They have been very aggressive in their bombing campaign. It hasn't been as precise as we would like. At the same time, they can't have Iranian-backed rebels, the Houthi rebels, right there on their doorstep, launching missiles into Riyadh like they just did. So we understand where the Saudis are coming from, but we need to work with them on the tactics. All right. Michael Waltz, thank you so much. Okay, thanks. The latest from Capitol Hill as a Republican Senate candidate responds to accusations of sexual misconduct with a minor, what it could mean to the balance of power in Washington. Plus, the man accused of assaulting Senator Rand Paul and breaking his ribs enters his plea in court as we get a new statement. The suspect in the Rand Paul assault case pleads not guilty in court. The Kentucky senator's neighbor, Renee Boucher, was arraigned on a fourth-degree assault charge today. Paul says he suffered 6 broken ribs. Boucher's lawyer says it was a minor dispute between 2 neighbors, but the senator's senior advisors says the senator has not talked to him in many years. And he adds the first conversation with the attacker came after Senator Paul's ribs were broken. This was not a fight. It was a blindside, violent attack by a disturbed person. Anyone claiming otherwise is simply uninformed or seeking media attention. The founder of Fusion GPS, the company that came up with the Russian dossier on President Trump, is now willing to cooperate with Congress. Fusion paid this man, Christopher Steele, a former British spy, to dig up dirt on then-candidate Trump during the 2016 presidential election. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live from Washington. What's the latest, Catherine?
Well, thanks, Dana. The deal means Simpson will answer questions behind closed doors next week, and he maintains the right to take the fifth, and that's what his lawyer was referring to at yesterday's news conference.
Mr. Simpson will be appearing voluntarily. He will tell the truth. The subpoena will be withdrawn, and he will be able to maintain Fusion GPS's privileges and honor its legal obligations.
This is the only image we got of Simpson yesterday as he avoided reporters on Capitol Hill. Just for some context, Senate Judiciary Committee investigators interviewed Simpson for more than 10 hours on August 22nd with similar ground rules, and a source familiar with those proceedings said the session was punctuated by stalling tactics and delays by Simpson and his legal team. Meantime, Fox News has learned that Simpson was with the Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya over a 72-hour period before and after the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with the president's son. And at that time, Fox News has confirmed that bank records show Fusion GPS was paid by a law firm for work on behalf of a Kremlin-linked oligarch, while at the same time Fusion paid that British spy to dig up dirt on candidate Trump. Dana.
All right. Thanks for that's a really interesting development. Catherine, but there's also other developments in the Mueller investigation regarding Michael Flynn. What's the latest on that?
Well, Fox News can confirm that the special counsel is investigating Flynn over his work with foreign governments, including Turkey, as well as recent reports that suggest charges may be imminent. Our contacts are kind of lowering expectations on that. The former National Security Council advisor and his son worked closely on several business accounts as part of the Flynn Intel group and were inseparable during the campaign. It's been long understood that Flynn and his family are concerned about his son's legal position. And over the weekend, his son dismissed the possibility, tweeting, "The SJW, or social justice warriors, are out in full this morning. The disappointment on your faces when I don't go to jail will be worth all your harassment." On a more serious note, these recent reports suggest that Flynn might cut a deal to help his son, but they don't really provide any evidence that that's actually what's going on right now. it may simply be that these leaks are a tactic to put pressure on Flynn, who is clearly a target, in the hopes that he will cut a deal and cooperate with the special counsel.
All right,
Dana.
Catherine Herridge, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
5 heroes who probably prevented a much more serious attack at a congressional baseball game are honored for their service by the men and women whose lives they helped save.
On behalf of all of us here in Congress, the country in Congress as an institution, thank you for saving the lives of our friends. We will always be in your debt. Thank you.